Hello, my name is Cody Deegan, and I am an artist. Let's talk about drawing clothing. I'm going to go ahead and just start with a shirt. So, the basic shape of a basic shirt is going to be something kind of like this. I'll have two sleeves attached, one on each side. And notice on this particular shirt, I'm drawing the sleeves with tapered ends. So slimmer down at the wrist, wider up at the shoulder. And then I'm going to go ahead and put some cuffs down at the end. Now I drew this shirt in a default pose. Default meaning this is how the shirt is created. This will have the least amount of distortion in the shirt. The deviation between your character's pose and this default layout will help you decide where the folds are going to go on this shirt. So let's talk about the effect of gravity. If this shirt was hanging up in the closet, the main torso part would just be hanging down in space, and then these sleeves would sag down because of the gravity. They're not going to stay outstretched like this. So we've got an anchor point on this outside line right here. Basically, this whole edge right here is anchored. But in this position, this will be our longest line right here. So let's look at these two lines. We've got the inside line and the outside line. They're both anchored here, and they're connected together. If gravity pulls this sleeve down, let me grab this measurement of this inside line, see where it's going to fall. It's going to come to rest right about here. And then this outside line, it comes to rest right here. And remember, these two were connected. So look at the problem here. This doesn't look right. The lengths are the same, but this angle is off. We've got this huge obtuse angle right here. And when we started, we had two angles that were much closer to right angles. It was closer to perpendicular. So this has changed. So we have a couple options here. Either this outside edge is going to lengthen or this inside edge is going to shorten. Well, this outside edge is not going to lengthen. It can't get longer unless there's some force pulling on it and it has some elasticity to it. So this has to stay the same. So the only option we have is to shorten this inside line. We've got this line going across here where the cuff connects. So if I come across like this, this is going to look a little more natural. And then we can add our cuff back in. Right? But what about this extra length right here from the inside edge? That can't just magically disappear. The fabric cannot just get smaller, so the only other option is it needs to displace. And by displace, so we've got a line right here that is a certain length, and let's say we want to now make it this length. How do we do that? Well, with fabric, we do this. Now, a good example of this concept is, let's look at two cities. Here's San Francisco, and here's Reno. And let's draw a straight line between them. Now, the distance between San Francisco and Reno on a straight line is 180 miles. But if you were to drive from San Francisco to Reno, you'd be taking some windy roads, and the actual driving distance would be 220 miles. So that's this same concept here. We have to shorten this inside line on this sleeve, but we need to compress it somewhere. Now, where's it going to compress? Well, it's going to compress right around the anchor point. It's not going to compress down here because this sleeve is just hanging freely. There's nothing to really compress against. Whereas up here, it's anchored. So we're going to see the compression right up in this area here. This is not a huge amount of fabric to displace if we look at this length right here. So most of the compression is going to stay right up here by this inside anchor point. and then the rest should be able to hang freely. So when you're drawing shirts and the arms are down below this angle here, you're going to see some fold lines right around this area. So right through here, you're going to see the fabric bunch up a little bit. Now these folds have a name. These particular folds are called half lock folds. And these occur at bends. So when the fabric bends, it creates these folds. So you'll also see them at the elbows and behind the knees. So let's bend an arm really quick. If we have a sleeve, same type of sleeve, with a cuff on the end, and then let's go ahead and bend it right through the middle. This distance here will stay the same, but it has to travel a different path now, so that actually might pull the cuff back a little bit. So this back side of the fabric will be stretched. So on an arm, what I like to do is find the elbow and this point right here, and I can give myself a construction line right through there because that's where I want my main line. My main fold is going to go right there. And then you can put another one on this side and another one on this side. So right there, those are also half lock folds. If we had a sleeve that didn't have a cuff on it, then this fabric would be allowed to hang down freely, just like the front of the shirt. Let's just take a big piece of fabric and let's suspend it in the air. So here's the ground. And to suspend this, I'm going to give this whole upper edge some anchor points. So think of a shower curtain. It's just hanging there. There's really not a whole lot of room for distortion here. The only force that's acting on this is gravity at the moment, and the anchor points are keeping the width fixed. To introduce some new folds, let's go ahead and change the width, and we're going to use this same method here, where we're going to compress the ends in. So just like a shower curtain, the fabric now needs to compress. So if we were laying on the floor looking directly up underneath this shower curtain, we would see this shape here. This is how the fabric would compress. And so looking at it head on, we're going to see vertical parallel lines creating these folds. And these particular folds are called pipe folds. And if we look at these a little closer, let me draw just a section of it bigger here. So you've got vertical lines that are parallel. And here at the ends, you could do a convex curve, come up a little bit, and then you could do a concave curve, come down a little bit, and repeat. And then carry these lines up. And that's one way you could draw pipe folds. So pipe folds occur when the lower edge is allowed to hang and the upper width is reduced to less than its normal size. If the floor was a little higher here, let's say the floor was right here. Here the length of the shower curtain would be obstructed by the floor, and so we'd have to displace it down here using this method again. So if it was being displaced by the floor, we could add some of these curves. There's not a whole lot of fabric that goes past the floor, so these particular compression folds would be a little subtle and they probably wouldn't go up very high. So when the fabric compresses against the floor, that's going to create these little folds that are called zigzag folds, and they're usually diamond shaped. Now they're usually not this uniform. Drawing with reference really helps when you're doing clothing, but if you're just drawing stuff out of your head and you're just trying to move through some designs quickly, you could introduce these diamond shapes into the design to give the impression that your fabric is being compressed. Now, I mention this because this is exactly what happens with a sleeve like this on a shirt. It's not allowed to hang freely. It doesn't have these pipe folds hanging down because it's being stopped before it can reach its full length. It's being stopped by the cuff. And when the cuff is on an arm, that cuff is being stopped by the wrist. So a lot of times you're going to see compression folds like this, these zigzag folds. And you'll usually see them down low in these areas where the fabric is being compressed. Now this arm isn't bent very much, but it is bent just enough. Remember, it's not in its default position. It's bent just enough that we actually might see a couple of these half lock folds. They'd probably be subtle, nothing major. And the last type of fold I'm going to talk about with a sleeve is called the spiral fold. Now a spiral fold is formed when the limb inside the fabric turns. So if you have an arm and it's rotated away from this default position on the fabric, you'll get some spiral folds. So using this arm as an example, normally with an arm resting like this, I would draw a hand. You know, I might draw a hand just in a basic resting position like this. But let's say the hand is not in a resting position like that. Let's say I drew the hand like this so that it's actually turned a little bit this way. When I do that, the arm's going to turn and it's going to pull the fabric with it a little bit. So I could get a spiral curve in like this. I'll make these ridge curves a little bit more spiraled. Most of the time with shirts in the sleeves, the spiral folds usually start in the back, up top, and then come forward and down. That's usually the direction they go most of the time. There are some positions that the arm can go in where the folds will not form in that manner, but most of the time you'll see them in this type of orientation. When a fold comes outside the edge of one of your contour lines, you know, bring it past it. Notice how I'm going to bring these edges by the cuff out just a little bit. It's this same concept right here. The fabric's not allowed to hang, it's being stopped, so it's going to bow out a little bit. So notice how just adding a couple of these compression edges right down by the cuff, and also adding these curves around the outside edge of these folds really gives some nice new life to this arm. Now it doesn't look so plain. And notice I'm not drawing these folds all the way through. I'm kind of picking and choosing where I put the fold and how long I make the line, because I don't want it to get too busy. I don't want to put folds all over this shirt, but in this instant, just enough to really sell the idea that the arm is rotating. And then I'm just going to tie right into these half lock folds that I already have under the arm. So here you can see at the elbow those ever so common half lock folds. And notice how one of them starts to go into a spiral fold up here like this. The rest of the shirt pretty much follows the shape of the arm. And then we've got the half locks that are starting to form underneath the arm. Here. So and then here you can see these zigzag folds being formed by the fabric puddling up at the bottom of the sleeve. So a lot of those diamond shapes in there. Got a little bit of a spiral curve. It's good to study reference because it gives you a vocabulary to work with when you don't have reference. I think ideally when you're character drawing, it's nice to not be a slave to reference. It's nice to be able to pull from your own knowledge, from your own studies. What if you have a sleeve that doesn't have cuffs on it and the fabric is allowed to hang? Well, just like that shower curtain, that fabric is most likely going to have some pipe folds in it. So this is the seam. I'm going to go ahead and knock that back a bit. I'm going to go ahead and put in a half lock fold right here, right under the arm. That's going to give the impression that this fabric has folded in on itself at the arm. And then our anchor point is up here at the shoulder. So this fold line, I should actually try and get its direction headed right towards the point of that shoulder. That's the tension point. So let's get our fold lines heading that way. This one I'm going to bring in just a little bit, just to give myself a little bit more room. And then from here, we're going to have probably a nice long line like this. And then we'll probably have another one come through like this. And these are the pipe folds. Coming from the tension point, headed down like this. So just something simple like that. Also too, if this is a skirt, all the anchor points are up here. It's being draped over the shoulders and gravity is just pulling it down. So let's get some pipe folds in this skirt as well, because the skirt is also fabric that is just hanging freely. I don't really like where this line was pointing. I'm trying to get everything to kind of go inward like a bell, more of a bell shape. And these lines were, I kind of didn't have good control of these lines. I want a bell shape. So that's why I keep adjusting these. As it comes over to the center, any lines I have for the pipe folds should be more straight. And then as I come over to this side, I want it to go in a bell shape in the other direction. Let's talk about another fold. If you have that shower curtain, that big piece of fabric, and you have it suspended in the air like this, but this time you only have it suspended from 2 points instead of the entire upper edge. Well, when you do this, we've got an anchor point here, we've got an anchor point here. Gravity is going to pull anything that's not supported down like this, right? So now what's going to happen is between these two anchor points, it's going to droop. So we'll get a nice curve like this. Same with down here. This is going to droop like this. Now because these are supported here and you've still got fabric hanging, you're still going to get a pipe fold here and here. But then in the center, you're going to have these curves coming down. They're going to be cascading and getting steeper as they come down. So the next one will be a little steeper. And it's going to head right towards those anchor points. Another one underneath that, maybe. Another one down here. Notice how this gets steeper and heads right back up towards that anchor point. Same here. These type of folds, these droopy folds, are called diaper folds. And they occur when fabric sags between two anchor points. A couple other things I could mention. Remember earlier when we were doing the sleeve with the cuff, well, that was a thin, lightweight material. Well, if you have more baggy fabric, let's say you have an arm, and let's say you have a cuff right here, and your fabric is a little lighter and baggier, not so form-fitting. Well, you've still got your anchor point here, but what's going to happen, it's going to balloon out more, and it could actually billow out over the top of the cuffs to where you might not even see much of the cuff. And so you might have something a little more like this. There we go. That locks it in better. So first things first, we can notice the elbows and under the arms right there, the half lock folds, the main one right in the middle, and here we've got a couple folds under the arm like that. We've got one shoulder coming forward and the other one going back, so that's giving us a twist. Now since this one's going back, it's pulling on the fabric. Everything's going in this direction. And that's why we get these folds down there on the shirt across the torso like this. We've got big spiral folds on the shirt. And then we can see a little bit of puddling down here. It's very faint. All right, let's look at some stretch folds. So if you have a character, okay, so we're going to put a shirt on this mannequin frame and the arms up. So let's talk about the type of folds this is going to create. We'll say the collar's right up here. And then I'm going to just follow the shape of the back. Now remember, we're looking at all the areas that are different from the default position. So the default position, the shirt's just sitting straight up and down. Here, notice we've got a little bit of an arch in the back. So right through here, you know, it might be a good spot to add a fold or two right through here. Because the back's changing position, the shirt is following the form, so it's going to change position as well. Bring it up like this, and then we'll bring it over here to the front of the pelvis. I made a V here because this particular shirt has a seam that's just going to go up the side like this. Now where does it go? Well, it goes to where the sleeve joins the shirt. So before I can finish this, I might need to figure out how the sleeve is going to go. So now if I had this mannequin frame filled out, even with just some cylinders like this, and then it would be nice to have the shape of the shoulder in there, just a basic shield shape. Okay, so having that form in really helps figuring out the shape of the shirt. So I'm just going to follow this arm. Just like this, and then right when I get to the end, I'm going to go ahead and put a cuff on this shirt. Notice how I've pulled it back away from the wrist. My thinking being that things are getting stretched, it might pull the sleeve back a little bit. So here's the basic starting shape, and then where this comes in, I think right through here, I'm going to draw a curve here to represent how the sleeve attaches to the shirt. And then this, let's just go ahead and do that seam right through there like that. And then this will follow the torso. Just like that. Do a little cleanup here so we can see what's going on. Now I want to start figuring out where to put some believable looking folds. And what I'm taking into consideration is that this shirt is now in a position different than the default pose. So what parts are different? And that's where we will put some folds, wherever the parts are different. The first thing that's pretty obvious is the arm. It's not out to the side, pointing down at a 45-degree angle, it's up and pointing straight ahead. So this point right here under the arm, this is a really big tension point right here. So all these pieces of fabric joining right here, this makes this a very important point. It's being pulled forward. The arm is pointing forward. So that means this probably came, when this was in its default position, this point was back behind. It was back here. So I know it pulled forward. The arm is also lifted up. So this point not only was pulled forward, it was pulled up. I'm going to say that the original starting point from the default position was right here. So that gives us a direction like this, right? And I'm going to use that to create a fold line right there, just like that. And then the fabric in front of the shoulder, you know, is wrapping around now. It's being pulled forward. So I can add another piece right here. And notice how just by doing that, this gives the impression of that arm and that shirt really stretching. And maybe I can just add another piece like this. So this sleeve is pushing forward. Everything in front of that sleeve is wrapping around that arm and being pulled in this direction. Everything back here will be a little bit tighter. I'm going to add a little secondary curve right here and see how it looks. Just to reinforce this fold right here. This is the main fold that's getting stretched. But then we'd probably have a little bit of stretching along this seam. I don't want to go overboard though. Because again, this is just for like drawing out of your head. So you don't have to go crazy. And I don't even know if I even like that. Sometimes I'll draw something just to see if it'll work, and it doesn't always work, so I'll erase it. And maybe just do a simple line like that. All right, now the sleeve itself, again, this is the main tension point right here. So this is going to be stretched out pretty good. And then we'll probably see this lower arm. We could follow this curve and bring this towards this seam here, because this is going to be stretched out as well. This fabric, you know, if this is being tucked into this cuff, you know, sometimes you'll see these little ridge lock folds right at the cuff. And then this will just follow the form of the arm. We don't have any bend in the arm. So the parts of the fabric that are stretched the most are all through the forearm and then all through here. Now you might up here have a little bit of excess fabric, and so you might get a few compression folds up here, those zigzag folds. So I might draw a couple in, see how it looks. It may not even need them. Like I said, sometimes I draw them in and they don't always look good. So I don't really like how those look. I still don't really like them. It would probably look good maybe with some shading, but if I'm just doing line art, I think this looks fine. So as usual at the elbow, some very evident half lock folds. The arm is rotated, so we're getting some really nice spiral folds right around the shoulder. And those are overlapping the half lock folds at the underarm. Same on the other arm. Here we've got the underarm half lock folds. And then what's interesting about this is we have the torso part of the shirt that is normally allowed to hang. Well, now it's being pressed against by the arms. So this is something that will happen when you have accessories like straps or belts that are pressing against the fabric. Notice how it creates these new half lock folds that disappear underneath the item that is applying the pressure. And then you can see them under here as well. How about an arm going up? Let's get some volume to this arm first. We would see the shoulder through there, and then the latissimus dorsi right there. And let's just put a cuff right there and there. And let's stretch this sleeve. So again, I'm giving it just a little bit of a billow around the cuff. And then I'm following the shape of the arm. And I need to pay attention to where that underarm anchor point is, right there. Because everything is going to head right towards that. So I'm kind of imagining where the seam is on the side of the body. This line, I'm going to say right in here roughly. So things are going to be stretching to that point. The forearm to that point. And then this part of the shirt can come like that. And then we're going to have the other part of the shirt stretching to that tension point. Good opportunity to get some pipe folds in here because the lower part of the shirt is just hanging with nothing obstructing it. This is headed to that tension point. Another one over there. Let's do a fold right there. We can see the collar up there. And then this is the chest. And we'd probably have more folds headed that way across the chest like this. So maybe I'll just offset the outside contour a little bit to sell those. Pipe folds will be headed towards that tension point as well. So maybe something like that. Maybe cascade these contours a little bit on the outside edge to create some interest. I feel like this needs to slope down a little bit. It just seemed a little, it was stretching in a weird spot. Maybe more like that. So the front of the shirt, which is normally allowed to just hang, is being stopped by the hips, which is causing it to bunch up down at the bottom. So we've got this bunching up here and here, just like that. So there's a lot of fabric here, so it's bunching up into horizontal rolls. And then you can start to see the diamond shapes appear in those zigzag folds. There's one. There's one. We've got one forming here. Long, narrow one right through there. And so then once it comes out of that compressed area, then the shirt starts to go back to its normal shape. Little bit of compression folds going in here, but these are ones I would probably not include in a character drawing, because remember, we're trying to simplify a lot of the time. So we don't need to include every little detail. Notice the arm is not bent that much, but just enough. We've got a diamond shape here, here. These edges are always interesting, where it's almost like it's going in on itself. It's like you have a piece of fabric, but when it bunches up, it comes like this. It's like the fabric is bending in on itself. Those are always good to note, and they create visual interest. Here's another one right here, where it's going into itself and then bulging out around. We've got a spiral fold here. And then we've got some spiral folds here. Half block folds at the underarm, very prominent. The fabric's bowing out a little bit around the elbow. Again, this arm isn't very bent. So we've got these leftover compression folds here from when it was bent. And then here we have the fabric ballooning out just above the cuff. And then we've got some more zigzag folds where the fabric is compressed. So it's like the fabric has been hanging and then there's something stopping it. So when it gets to the end, it just kind of bunches up like this. And that's where you get those zigzag folds. All right, let's see what happens when the arm is going across the body and how it stretches the fabric of the shirt in the back. So let's bring the shirt, the base of the shirt around the pelvis like that. Come up to the bend. I'm going to have some folds in here. Go up around that shoulder blade. Just follow the form of the torso. We'll have a collar, and then this shoulder is, let me get a form in here to make this a little easier. Let's get a cylinder, a bit of a shield shape for the shoulder. Okay, so I just needed to know how far out the torso was coming. So the shirt can come down, in, and down like this. The tension point's going to be right around in here where that seam is. That's going to go right up to the point of the shoulder like that. We'll just follow the form of the arm. And then we've got the half lock folds right in there. Because this is where the torso changes direction, this is where the fabric's going to pull. It's going to pull along this line here. So I can take these folds, and I can just take them up towards that anchor point there. All right, just trying to get all this cleaned up. I'm trying adding a little diamond shape there. I want to cascade these. I want to offset them. And as usual, I'm just not liking my diamond shapes tonight. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Maybe if I just don't connect it, something like this. Now in this particular shirt, it's pretty obvious that the arms are not in their default state. In fact, with the hands behind the back, that's really getting a twisting motion, and we're really seeing these spiral curves all throughout the upper arm here. And then we've got a little bit of definition of the anatomy underneath the shirt. So right here around the chest, these are kind of prominent. Displacement of the fabric around the chest muscles. And then we've got two types of folds occurring underneath the chest muscles. We can see two tension points causing almost a diaper fold. The fold lines are all following this sort of path. So it's more prominent on this side, but then look at these ones here. They're all zigzag folds that are following a diaper fold path. Then we can see these diamond shapes in here. So the fabric is allowed to hang, but it's being compressed a little bit by the anatomy underneath. So it's not hanging freely. So here we have a shirt with longer sleeves that doesn't have any cuffs. So the anchor points are right here on the shoulders, and it's very easy to see these pipe folds coming from that anchor point here, here, here. And then since we've got a knot right here, normally this would be allowed to hang and we would probably just see some pipe folds like this, but because it's tied in a knot, that's pulling those pipe folds down and towards it like this. So now everything changes direction and heads towards this new anchor point. Same thing here. We've got these long sleeves with no cuffs, so the fabric's just allowed to hang. We're going to have long pipe folds, very long pipe folds, and everything's heading right up to the shoulder. This is a heavier material, so the folds are not very prominent. This whole area up here is acting as a giant anchor point, comes out to the edge of her chest, and then changes direction abruptly, and this is where gravity takes hold. So from her chest, the material is allowed to hang, and we get some new pipe folds this way. And then right here we can see a bit of a half lock fold where the fabric is bending over on itself. And notice around the underarm we're really not seeing any half lock folds like we normally see on the thinner fabric materials. Here's a pipe fold lover's dream. We've got a skirt here with a lot of ruffles. So basically we've got a seam that acts as an anchor point for this fabric, and all this fabric is allowed to just hang freely. Notice we've got it here on the sleeves as well. The torso itself, the fabric comes down and then bunches up at the waist because we have a small belt here that impedes it from just hanging freely, and where it tucks in, you'll see a few little half lock folds. And then the skirt part just turns right back into pipe folds. And these all have a nice variation. There's thin ones, there's thick ones, there's nice curves at the bottom here. There's direction changes. So all this variation creates visual interest. You know, if you just draw a skirt and you just keep everything very uniform, there's nothing wrong with that. It still looks good, but look at that compared to this. And a lot of this can contribute to the mood you're trying to achieve as well. If you're trying to convey a different mood in your artwork, maybe you want something a little more uniform like this other one over here. All right, this particular dress here, mainly pipe folds, but then we've also got the diaper folds on the sleeve. So we've got anchor point here at the shoulder, and then right here on the forearm. The fabric is being suspended between these 2 points. Now granted, it's still being anchored along the arm here as well. But you also got to realize that this fabric is probably this long. Just like the shower curtain, this has all been pushed inward like this. So we have a lot of excess fabric that's all just hanging right through here. And then again, we've got a little belt that is impeding the fabric from just hanging in long pipe folds. So it all is coming in to this belt and then coming out again. And this sleeve is just allowed to hang freely. Notice how we get this angle here. So besides pipe folds and diaper folds, because she is bending her arm, notice right through here, there are some half lock folds.